What's going on, baseball fans? How are we doing? So as we head down the stretch towards the playoffs this year, I couldn't help but think there's going to be some teams this year that are pretty good that aren't going to make the playoffs. So I wanted to do a video on the 5 best teams that didn't make the playoffs. Let's go talk about it. Starting off at number 5, I have the 2013 Texas Rangers. This was a pretty good team in 2013, just fell short of the playoffs. If we take a look at where they finished with a record of 91-72, 5.5 games back of the Oakland A's. And in the wild card, they only finished a game back of the Rays for the second wild card spot. This was a pretty good team. You had guys like Adrian Beltre, Ian Kinsler, Nelson Cruz. You had Craig Gentry, who had a really good year that year for the Rangers. I mean, you had Elvis Andrus, who was really good. Leonys Martin was really good. And on the pitching side, Yu Darvish, Derek Holland were atop of the rotation. You had Joe Nathan in the bullpen. This was a really good team. If we go take a look at where they ranked offensively, they weren't the best offensive team. They ranked 14th in the major leagues, but they still had some quality bats in that lineup. If you take a look here at the numbers, Adrian Beltre was really good that year. 30 home runs, 92 RBIs with a .315 batting average, .371 on base, a .509 slugging. And like I said, Craig Gentry, he was actually second in WAR according to Fangraphs on the Rangers. You had Martin, had a pretty solid year that year, had 36 stolen bases. Elvis Andrus had 42 stolen bases that year, had a pretty decent batting average of .271. Nelson Cruz had 27 home runs, 76 RBIs. So, I mean, you had some pop in this lineup. While they didn't rank, near the top, it was still a good lineup. The pitching, this is where they were really good. They ranked 6th in starting pitching. And like I said, Yu Darvish was leading the way. Had a really good year that year through 32 starts, a 2.83 ERA, a 3.28 FIP, almost 12 strikeouts per 9. Derek Holland was really solid back in 2013, a 3.42 ERA, a 3.44 FIP. I feel like that was a bit of a problem for the Rangers, though, because they really had to rely on these two guys. You had all these other guys who had starts in the double digits, like Martin Perez. They had Matt Garza on that team as well. Who remembers Alexi Agondo, too? So they did have some, decent starting pitching. I felt like maybe they lacked one more guy, to go along with a Darvish and a Holland. One guy they could really count on, someone else that could have given you 30 starts. But the bullpen was really good. They were second in relief pitching in 2013. Joe Nathan was out of his mind in 2013, had 43 saves over 67 games, a 1.39 ERA, a 2.26 FIP. Over 10 strikeouts per 9. He was very good. Unfortunately for the Rangers, they just really took a turn in September. They got off to a really good start. April 17-8, May 17-11. They kind of were treading water in June and July. July they struggled, but August they went 20-7, good for a .741 win percentage. But then they faded in September, and like I said, they ended up falling 5.5 games back behind Oakland in the division. And actually, if we take a look at the standings heading into September, they were leading that division by 2 games. So to fall 5.5 games back, that really shows how hot Oakland was and how cold Texas got. And then, like I said, in the end, they ended up falling just a game short of the wild card. They actually in September, while they did struggle overall, I mean, if you look at the record, they finished 12-16. But if you take a look at their last 10 games, they actually went 8-2 in their last 10 games. So unfortunately, it was just a little too late for the Rangers at that point. Just an inconsistent team. Overall, though, I mean, I think this was a really talented team that should have made the playoffs that year. Coming in at number 4, I have the 2019 Cleveland Indians. This was a good team that just fell short of the playoffs. So the 2019 Cleveland Indians, they finished with a record of 93-69. They had a lot of good guys on this team. Let's start with the offense. Kind of like the Texas Rangers at number 5. Didn't rank too high in terms of offense. They ranked 16th in Major League Baseball that year, but they had some guys in this lineup. You had Francisco Lindor, who was on top of his game that year. Carlos Santana was providing a lot of power. Jose Ramirez, all around good play. Roberto Perez providing offense from the catching position, while also providing some great defense from the catching position. Jordan Luplow was very solid for the most part. Oscar Mercado, Tyler Naquin, you had Kipnis there too. So there were some good bats in this lineup. The starting pitching, this was where this team really thrived. They ranked 5th in starting pitching that year. I mean, you had guys like Shane Bieber. He emerged that year, had a 3.26 ERA over 33 starts, a 3.33 FIP, around 11 strikeouts per 9. Mike Clevinger, he had his injury problems that year, but really good numbers overall. You did have Trevor Bauer, ended up getting traded to the Cincinnati Reds mid-season, but for the most part, he was really solid. Imagine if Trevor Bauer ended up staying with the Cleveland Indians for the rest of that season. Who knows if that would have maybe made things a little bit different, but you had other guys too, like Aaron Savali, Carlos Carrasco. They each had double-digit starts. Carrasco, while he did have a 4.98 ERA, he pitched better than that with a 4.14 FIP. Plesac, I mean, he was decent for the most part, a 3.81 ERA. The FIP was a bit higher, though, around 5, but he had 21 starts. You had Plutko, who had some starts, too. So, I mean, even Corey Kluber, he was there, too. Unfortunately, he got hurt, so he ended up not really contributing all that much. But you had a lot of starting pitching on this Cleveland Indians team. Even the bullpen was pretty good, too. They had the 6th best bullpen. Brad Hand had himself a good year that year. With over 13 strikeouts per 9, 34 saves. You had other guys in that bullpen too. Tyler Clippard, Oliver Perez, Nick Weckren, Adam Simber. So there were good arms all across this team. Like I said, the offense maybe didn't rank very well, but you still had some really good bats. If we take a look at where they finished in the standings, they finished 2nd behind the Minnesota Twins, and that was a big reason for Cleveland to not make the playoffs this year as well. Minnesota was just a really good team. They hit a ton of home runs that year, over 100 wins. I mean, all the home runs for the Minnesota Twins in 2019. Indians ended up finishing 3 games behind the Twins in the wild card. They fell just short there, 3 games back of the Tampa Bay Rays for the second wild card spot. In the end, they lost 5 straight games. They just faded down the stretch. But Cleveland, ultimately, I think this is just a really good team. 93 wins. I mean, that's a lot of wins to not make the playoffs. So Cleveland Indians, they come in at number 4 on my list. Coming in at number 3, we have the 1999 Cincinnati Reds. What a team this was in 1999. Had 96 wins, the most wins by a team in the wild card era to not make the playoffs. Led by Jack McKeon in 99, this was a good team. You had guys like Mike Cameron, Barry Larkin, Sean Casey. Red Sox legend Pokey Reese was on the Cincinnati Reds at one point. Pete Harnisch was really good in the rotation. Scott Williamson was nails in the bullpen. Remember Aaron Boone on the Cincinnati Reds? Yankee fans, do you remember Aaron Boone playing for the Reds in 1999? This was a good Reds team. Unfortunately for the Reds, in 1999, they were locked in a heated battle for the division with the Houston Astros, who were loaded in their own right. They had Mike Hampton, Jeff Bagwell, Craig Biggio. I mean, come on. You had Billy Wagner. I mean, this was a really good Astros team. If you go to the standings in 1999, let me pull up these standings. In the NL Central going into September, the Reds were only 1.5 games back of the Astros, but this Astros team was just so good. In the end, the Astros ended up winning that division by 1.5 games. This was a tight race down the stretch. It went into the last week. The Astros barely edged out the Reds, and then in the end, the Reds ended up playing a 1-game playoff with the New York Mets for the wild card. I mean, unfortunately, they ran into Al Leiter, who threw a complete game against them in that 1-game playoff. The Cincinnati Reds, I believe, sold like 54th. It was a complete sellout, 54,000 people in that stadium. I mean, one of the biggest crowds ever for a 1-game playoff. The Cincinnati Reds, they had a lot of support that year, especially down the stretch. Unfortunately for this Reds team, just not enough in the end. Ran into, good teams like the Astros, good teams like the Mets. And if we actually take a look here with the Cincinnati Reds, breaking down the month by month, they were very good, like from start to finish. Well, April, 9-12 in April, but in May, 16-10, 18-9 in June, 16-12 in July, 17-12 in August, 19-9 in September. They were very good down the stretch. Just in the end, just not quite enough. Let's go take a look at the numbers for Cincinnati. With the offense, they were okay on the offensive side. I mean, they had bats in that lineup. They didn't rank very well in the offense. They were 14th, so they were middle of the road. But I need to actually point out, defensively, this team was nuts. They ranked by a mile first first in defensive runs above average, well ahead of the Atlanta Braves, who had a lot of good defensive players in their own right. I mean, Cincinnati on the defensive side, I mean, Mike Cameron, Barry Larkin, Pokey Reese. I mean, come on, Aaron Boone at third base. You had Jeffrey Hammonds as well. Sean Casey was very good at first base. A lot of good defense for the Cincinnati Reds. But on the offensive side, you had a lot of good bats. Mike Cameron was really good then. Barry Larkin was very solid, had a batting average of 293, a 390 on base. Sean Casey was providing a really high batting average of 25 home runs. Greg Vaughn had 45 home runs that year. Aaron Boone was pretty solid, 280 batting average, 14 homers, 72 RBIs, 17 stolen bases, a 330 on base. With the starting pitching, Cincinnati, they were pretty decent in the starting pitching. They were decent. They weren't great. They ranked 23rd overall. You did have Pete Harnisch, who had a really good season that year through 33 starts. But I feel like in the end, they really did lack like that true number one guy. They went up against Al Leiter in that one game playoff, and in the end, I think just the Reds didn't have enough starting pitching. It was decent, but I mean, when you're ranking 24th, that's not really going to get it done. But the fact that they got 96 wins with not the best starting pitching, hey, that says something about this Reds team. With the bullpen, they were better. They ranked 8th in the bullpen. And I mentioned Scott Williamson. He was really good that year. Over 62 games. You know, Danny Graves, you know, he had a lot of saves as well. But Scott Williamson overall was the best reliever in that bullpen. Ton of strikeouts, 2.41 ERA, 3.37 FIP. So the Cincinnati Reds, you know, it's kind of a shame that this team wasn't able to make the playoffs. This is a really fun team when you're looking back at these players. I mean, Aaron Boone has said himself, this was the most fun he ever had, you know, in any season that he played. I mean, even on the 2003 Yankees, they made it to the World Series that year. So for him to say that he had more fun on this 1999 Reds team, that says a lot. So unfortunately for the Reds, one of the best teams, but didn't make the. Coming in at number 2, the 2005 Cleveland Indians. Indians fans, I am so sorry I've put 2 Indians teams on this list, but I mean, I can't leave out the 2005 Indians. This team was so good. 93-69, led by Eric Wedge. There was some talent on this team. Grady Sizemore had an amazing season in 2005. You had Travis Hafner, Victor Martinez, Johnny Peralta, Ronnie Belliard, Coco Crisp right before he went to the Red Sox. He was so good in the rotation. You had guys like Kevin Millwood. You had Cliff Lee, CC Sabathia. Are you kidding me? There was talent all across this team. Let's go take a look at the numbers. Cleveland, when you actually, according to Fangraphs, when you look at both the offense and the defense, they were the best overall team in terms of wins above replacement that year. If you take a look at the offense, they were 3rd in offense that year. Take a look at what Cleveland was able to do with these guys in the lineup. Look at some of these numbers here. Like I said, Grady Sizemore, this guy was just ridiculous. Hit 289, 348 on base, 22 home runs, 81 RBIs, 22 stolen bases. Just an all-around fantastic season for Grady Sizemore. Unfortunately, the injuries really derailed him in his career. But Travis Hafner, he went off that year, hit 305, a 408 on base, 33 homers, 108 RBIs. Look at Coco Crisp. I mean, the Red Sox went out and got him to replace Johnny Damon, and there was obviously a reason why. Hit 300, a 345 on base, 16 homers, 69 RBIs, 15 stolen bases. Victor Martinez was solid offensively and defensively, had 20 home runs, 80 RBIs, hit 305. I mean, Johnny Peralta had a really good year, 292 average with 24 homers. Look at Ronnie Belliard hitting 284 that year, 17 home runs, 78 RBIs. I mean, come on. There was so many good bats in this Indians lineup. Let's go take a look at the starting pitching. They ranked 5th in starting pitching that year. Cliff Lee, fantastic that year. He was very good over 32 starts. CC Sabathia, very good in 2005. The ERA is in the 4s, but that 3.69 FIP is a lot better. I mentioned Kevin Millwood. He had a really good year that year, 2.86 ERA. I mean, come on. Jake Westbrook was with the Indians that year. They had 5 guys that all of them made over 30 starts. The bullpen was really good too. They ranked 5th in relief pitching. I mean, Rafael Betancourt, Bob Howery, Arthur Rhodes, Matt Miller, Fernando Cabrera. I mean, the list goes on. This Indians team was just so good. If we go take a look at the standings in 2005, heading into September, Cleveland, they were 7 games back of a really good White Sox team who ended up winning the World Series that year. That White Sox team was just so good in 2005. There was no stopping the White Sox in 2005. But if we go take a look at the wild card standings that year, Cleveland only just fell 2 games behind the Red Sox, who they won the wild card, and then they lost to the White Sox in that division round. So unfortunately for Cleveland, they really fell off right there at the end. They lost 3 straight to end their season. This Cleveland Indians team was just so good top to bottom. They were just all these other good teams. The White Sox, the World Series champions. The Red Sox had 95 wins coming off their World Series in 2004, winning the wild card. Unfortunately for Cleveland, they were just all these other good teams. I mean, look at the run differential too. If you take a look, Cleveland actually had the highest run differential, I believe, at least in the American League. St. Louis had a 171 run differential, but in the American League, the Indians had the highest run differential and still didn't even make the playoffs. I mean, even the White Sox that year had a plus 96, and the Indians had a plus 148. So, hey, crazy numbers to see. I mean, what a team that did not make the playoffs. And coming in at number 1, my Red Sox from 2011. I still look back at this 2011 season, and I still can't believe it. I mean, this Red Sox team, they were so good in 2011. They had one of the most historic collapses in September. I still remember that night, game 162, when they lost to the Orioles in the end, and the Rays ended up winning it on the Evan Longoria walk-off home run. I remember sitting there in my living room watching this, my face buried in my hands. I already had my ticket purchased for the 1-game playoff, that if they forced a 1-game playoff for the Rays, I already had the ticket purchased. I just could not believe what ended up happening that night. All of September was completely miserable. This team was so bad in September, but I'll get to that in a second. Let's get to why this team was so good. If you take out September, this team was phenomenal. Let's go take a look at this team. If you go look at the offense, they were the number 1 offense that year. Look at the guys that they had in this lineup. Jacoby Ellsbury had a 9.5 WAR in 2011. This dude had one of the best seasons of all time. I mean, come on. This is absolutely insane. A 321 average, of 376 on base, 32 home runs, 105 RBIs, 39 stolen bases. I mean, that is incredible. Are you kidding me? Dustin Pedroia had a really good year that year. He hit 307 to 387 on base, 21 home runs, 91 stolen bases, 26 RBIs. Dustin Pedroia and Jacoby Ellsbury each got MVP votes that year. I believe Ellsbury, I think, finished second in MVP voting. I think Pedroia, I think he finished in the top 5. They also had Adrian Gonzalez that year, who they traded for before that season. He was really good that year. A 338 on base, a 338 batting average, a 410 on base, 27 home runs, 117 RBIs. He was fantastic. David Ortiz, I remember he had some starts that he did miss. But overall, he was really solid. Had a 309 average, a 398 on base, 29 home runs, 96 RBIs. Kevin Youkilis was really good. Marcos Scutaro was really good that year. Jared Saltalamacchia was decent. I mean, this was a really good offense. You had some guys in this offense. Before I get to the main problem with this team, I want to point out the bullpen. They had the number 1 bullpen that year. Jonathan Papelbon was on top of his game this year until that last game of the season. I can't stop thinking about it. Here we go. He was lights out. A 2.94 ERA, but look at the FIP, a 1.53 FIP, over 12 strikeouts per 9, barely give up any home runs. He had a 3.0 wins above replacement. That's just so good. 31 saves. Daniel Bard was awesome in the setup role. 70 games, ton of strikeouts. I mean, Daniel Bard was awesome. Alfredo Aceves was really good that year. Scott Atkinson was actually pretty underrated that year. Dan Wheeler had some time in middle relief. I mean, they had Matt Albers, Franklin Morales. They had a really good bullpen. Don't forget, they also had Hideki Okajima. Well, he was hurt a lot that year, but I'm just remembering Hideki Okajima, crazy. I mean, he was so good in 2007, but they also had Andrew Miller there. He was getting spot starts at the end. But speaking of starts, this was the problem with that team. If you take a look at the starting pitching, they ranked 24th in starting pitching that year. doesn't mean they didn't have bad starting pitching. Josh Beckett was really good that year, a 2.89 ERA, a 3.57 FIP over 30 starts. John Lester was really solid that year, over 31 starts, 3.47 ERA. But that's where they started running into issues. Daisuke was out pretty much that entire year. Clay Buchholz ended up getting shut down, I think, in August of that year. John Lackey was dealing with basically a bum arm the entire year. He ended up getting Tommy John after this. He was horrible that year. Tim Wakefield, they kept running out there because he was trying to get, his 200th career win. Terry Francona, he just kept throwing him out there. But honestly, I kind of look back on that. It's like, who else did they really have? Tim Wakefield, this is a guy you at least could put out there and maybe give you at least a decent start. But in 2011, he was just bad. They just had no depth in the starting pitching. They were calling up guys like Kyle Weiland that year. He had an 8.72 ERA. I remember watching him pitch in a couple of starts, and I'm like, who the heck is this guy? They did trade for Eric Bedard at the deadline that year. He was decent through 8 starts. He had a 4.03 ERA, a 3.47 FIP. He was pretty decent, but he just wasn't really anything that was going to change the hopes of the Red Sox that year. If we go take a look at the standings, heading into September, they were 83-52. That's a really good record heading into September. They were a game and a half ahead of the Yankees. They were 9 games ahead of the Rays. You got to remember, the Rays were 9 games back, but the Red Sox were so bad in September that year. The Rays, they didn't really do anything special in September that year. They just played solid baseball for that last month. And the Rays ended up winning the wild card in the last game of the season. They won 5 straight to end their season. The Red Sox were 3-7 in their last 10. Again, just the memories that this brings back. It's just, that was probably one of the worst months of my life. That was just such a bad month. But this Red Sox team, with that offense, with that bullpen, with the arms that they did have, losing a couple to injury, I think this team could have been, let's say they stayed healthy for that entire year. If you go look at the Red Sox starting pitching, if they had a healthy John Lackey that year, if Clay Buchholz was healthy, if Daisuke was healthy for the most part, I think this team could have really made a run in the postseason. If you had a healthy Buchholz, Lackey, and Daisuke, I still think you would have at least won a wild card. Definitely would have had a chance at winning that division. I think 2011, I think they could have made a run that year. I think they had a team to win a World Series that year. Unfortunately, just no starting pitching depth for the Red Sox. So one of the most miserable times of my life. I hate thinking about this team, but in my opinion, the best team to never make the playoffs. So that's my list. Tell me what you think down below. What teams would you put on this list? But that's all I have for right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.